This is blasphemy! This is madness! This is death! Madness of Deathwing is the final encounter in Dragon Soul and part 2 of the epic confrontation with the Destroyer himself. This is a 2-phase fight, and much like Spine, it is another execution burn fight. Throughout the fight, you'll be forced to deal with not only Deathwing but a plethora of ads. So many that we won't actually list them all here. You'll also be granted help from the aspects who provide you with powerful buffs and spells. You'll want to bring 1 to 2 tanks, 5 to 7 healers, and a balanced DPS makeup. We'll remind you that this video and strategy guide were created during the PTR testing, and if the fight changes significantly when it goes live, we will create a new guide to reflect this. Thank you. Players cannot attack Deathwing directly during phase 1, but that doesn't stop him from getting all up in your grill. To start off, the fight takes place over 4 separate platforms. Each platform corresponds to a different NPC, and you can be sure that Deathwing will hate on whichever platform you choose to call home. Assault Aspects is cast on whichever NPC's platform your raid chooses to group on. This basically determines which platform Deathwing will spawn his ads at. This is cast once at the start of the fight, and again after each platform is completed. Because of the cast time, this allows your raid to choose which platform to continue the encounter. You will always assault the platform where the majority of players wait. Once on each platform, the boss will launch an Elementium Bolt. This projectile is fired at the platform and lands in a set and highly noticeable location. Players can DPS and kill the projectile, but once it lands, it will deal very high fire damage to all players with its Elementium Blast. This spell deals less damage to players farther away from the impact point. Shortly after landing, it will begin to tick for more fire damage. After assaulting a platform for around 2 minutes, Deathwing will begin to cast Cataclysm, a long cast that upon completion destroys the world as we know it and brings an end to all life on Azeroth for all eternity. Also, it wipes the raid. To keep this from happening, the raid will need to defeat all of his ads. Each platform is home to one of Deathwing's limb tentacles. Unlike Thanksgiving dinner, the wings, arms, or legs are all the same, and receiving one over the other doesn't necessarily mean the family loves you any less or thinks your sister is the favorite child. Arm tentacles and wing tentacles have the same spells and health, and only differ in name, kind of like the Olsen twins. At 75, 50, and 20%, each tentacle will spawn multiple blistering tentacles. These ads are immune to AoE and use the spell Blistering Heat. This deals stacking fire damage every few seconds. Killing a limb tentacle will cause agonizing pain on Deathwing. This momentarily stuns him and deals damage equal to 20% of his health. Once on each platform, limb tentacles will also spawn regenerative blood ads. These ads can be tanked, but stack Degenerative Bite on their primary target. This debuff ticks for shadow damage every second and stacks. Additionally, these ads have an energy bar that fills over the course of around 10 seconds. Once full, the ad will heal to full health, and their energy bar will begin to fill again. Not long after assaulting an aspect, a mutated corruption will spawn. This massive tentacle can be tanked and has 2 spells. Crush deals very high damage to all players in the frontal cone. Impale is a debuff placed on the tentacle's main aggro target that deals extremely high damage on expiration. On some testing passes, Impale also placed a debuff on the target that caused them to take additional damage from further impales. We aren't sure if this will stay or not. Once you have saved all 4 platforms from being assaulted, phase 2 will begin. During phase 2, the raid will be able to attack Deathwing directly. As the phase goes on, Deathwing will hemorrhage corrupted blood, dealing increased fire damage to all players. He will also spawn 2 types of ads in this phase, Elementium Fragments and Elementium Terrors. Multiple fragments will spawn at one time throughout the phase and use the spell Shrapnel. This deals high damage to random players. Terrors spawn 2 at a time throughout the phase and will stack Tetanus on their main target. This spell deals moderate shadow damage every second and stacks. During phase 1, the NPCs will assist players with 1 passive buff and 1 active spell. Thrall is unique in that he only provides a passive buff, but it lasts through the whole fight. The other 4 NPCs, Alexstrasza, Kalikos, Nostormu, and Ysera, will stop providing their help once their platform is finished being assaulted. They will, however, proceed to provide their help again when phase 2 begins. Thrall provides players with the Carrying Winds buff. This allows players to jump between platforms. To help with jumping across multiple platforms, players are granted a short duration run speed buff upon landing. Alexstrasza's buff increases the raid's maximum health by 20%. In addition, she will destroy all burning tentacles in Phase 1 and lower damage from corrupted blood in Phase 2. Kalecgos' buff increases the raid's damage by 20%. In addition, he grants your raid Spellweaver, which causes all attacks to deal high splash damage. Nostormu increases the raid's haste by 20% and helps further by placing a time zone on the platform. The time zone drastically slows down the Elementium Bolt, reduces the attack speed of enemies by 50%, and makes sure that people on the West Coast watch TV later than people on the East Coast. Finally, Ysera increases healing by 20%. She'll also grant all players the Dream Spell. This appears as an extra action button on the UI that players can use to reduce incoming damage by 50% for 5 seconds. It has a 30-second cooldown. Now that we've covered all of the spells, let's get to the strat. Phase 1 is about saving each platform and NPC from being assaulted. This is done the same way on all of the 4 platforms, but the raid will lose NPC buffs as the fight goes on. Your raid will be able to choose platform order and therefore which order to lose the buffs, but we'll get into that a little later. Without taking the buffs into consideration, each platform is handled the exact same way. Begin by DPSing the Limb Tentacle. Go all out as it has no aggro. A few moments later, the mutated corruption will spawn. The tank will want to quickly pick this ad up and face it away from the raid. Redirect all DPS to the mutated corruption to kill it as quickly as possible. As it is killed, it will place the Impale debuff on your tank. The debuff deals extremely high damage when it wears off, so the tank should make sure to pop a strong cooldown before this happens. Feel free to use outside cooldowns such as Pain Suppression or Hand of Sacrifice as well. If Ysera is still alive, use her Dream Spell to reduce the damage from this. After being hit, the tank may gain a debuff that increases damage from further impales. If this is the case, it is a good idea to have the off tank taunt the mutated corruption and eat the next impale. While your raid kills the mutated corruption, Deathwing will launch an Elementium Bolt at the platform. This will fly over the center of the platform and land in a spot indicated by a large yellow swirling graphic. The raid will need to keep 2 things in mind. A. Immediately redirect all DPS to the bolt and ideally kill it before it lands. B. If it is going to land, make sure to be max distance since it deals less damage to players who are farther away. This is also a good opportunity to use raid cooldowns. Aura Mastery, Barrier, Totem, and more are all good options for the bolt's impact. Remember to use the Dream Spell as well if Ysera is still available. If it does land, players must continue DPSing it to finish it quick before it begins to tick too much. Once the bolt has been destroyed, continue DPSing the mutated corruption. It should die fairly soon. After the mutated corruption has been destroyed, return raid DPS to the Limb Tentacle. At this point, the raid will need to finish off the limb as fast as possible. This will be hindered by 2 things. Shortly into this, the tentacle will spawn multiple regenerative blood ads. These low health ads should be picked up by the tank, and if Nostormu is still alive, tanked inside of the time zone. Tanking the ads in this effect will lower their attack speed and decrease the rate that their degenerative bite stacks. Theoretically, these ads can be AoE'd down, but because they will heal to full health every 10 seconds, it may be easier to single target them. If this is the case, have 1 player assigned for the rest of DPS to assist, or simply mark each ad to kill until none remain. Again, the ads can be AoE'd down, and Kalecgos' buff will certainly make this easier, but without proper execution, this would be more of a headache than a help. As the raid kills the Limb Tentacle, it will spawn Blistering Tentacles. This occurs when its health reaches 75, 50, and 25%. The Blistering Tentacles cannot be AoE'd and must be focused down one at a time. If Alexstrasza is still active, she'll destroy all of them quickly with her Cauterized spell. Deathwing will begin to cast Cataclysm as your raid is finishing the Limb Tentacle, and you'll have 60 seconds to finish the job. If successful, the platform will be saved and you can proceed to the next. Saving a platform will, however, cause your raid to lose the buffs granted by the NPC added. Let's go over how this can affect the fight. The order your raid chooses to save the NPCs may drastically change the difficulty of the fight. The encounter can of course be completed in any order, but realistically some raid comps and players may struggle with certain orders more than others. We can't give an exact order to take, since it will vary depending on your raid's preference, but we can give a general sense of what to expect. Much of this fight is about defeating ads quickly to prevent the damage they do. Because of this, the 2 NPCs who are arguably the strongest are Alexstrasza and Kalecgos. These 2 will increase the raid DPS by the highest amount, and we suggest your raid saves both until last. In general, we feel Ysera is the weakest since 20% extra healing is not needed if the ads die 20% faster. Dead ads lower healing requirements anyway. After this, Nosdormu is the next weakest NPC. His time zone will give the raid more time to DPS Elementium Bolt before it lands, cutting down on raid damage as well as slow the attack speed of Regenerative Bloods, cutting down on tank damage. Yes, Nosdormu lowers damage from Bolt, but he barely helps you actually kill it faster. Because of this, you aren't saving that much time. Raid cooldowns such as Barrier or Tranquility can make up for the extra healing needed, since the Bolt will now be landing and cooldowns are not needed for much else in Phase 1. The attack speed slow in Regenerative Bloods is negligible, since you'll be killing them much faster by leaving Calicos up, cutting down on the added tank damage. This means the most difficult choice is whether to save Calicos or Alexstrasza for last. We recommend Alexstrasza, since not having to kill 3 waves of Blistering Tentacles will increase raid damage much more than splash damage that doesn't affect many targets at the proper time. By leaving Alexstrasza up, the raid gains much more focused DPS on the tentacle. Alternatively, by leaving Calicos up, the raid gains much more DPS on everything else. The Mutated Corruption, the Elementium Bolt, Regenerative Bloods, Blistering Tentacles, and the Limb Tentacle itself. However, there are no Blistering Tentacles the other way around, and they do spawn 3 times. Ultimately, we can't really tell you which order is the best for you, and it will depend on your raid's strengths and weaknesses. For example, you could opt to lose Alexstrasza and Calicos first and second, run a lower number of healers, extra DPS, 1 tank, and rely on Nosdormu's 20% haste and Ysera's 20% healing in Dream to give your 3 healers the output of 5 or 6. There are many ways to determine your best order. Our recommended order is Ysera, Nosdormu, Calicos, then Alexstrasza. Thankfully, at the start of Phase 2, the raid will regain all NPC buffs. This is primarily a burn phase, but the raid will need to quickly swap DPS to focus down ads anytime they spawn. Elementium fragments will need to be picked up by the tanks and must be killed very quickly. If not killed fast enough, the ad's Tetanus spell will stack too high and kill the tank. Tanks must remember that in addition to their own defensive cooldowns, they will once again have access to Ysera's Dream spell. Other players will want to use Dream as well when focused by the Elementium fragments. These ads will place the Shrapnel debuff on random targets that deals very high damage when it expires. Be proactive about cooldowns and focus ads whenever they spawn, and Phase 2 shouldn't prove to be a problem. This is another fight that sounds much more dangerous than it is. Phase 1 can be quite long, but remember it is just a repeating cycle. Remember the DPS priorities and kill the correct ads quickly if you want to succeed. Don't hesitate to adjust the platform order as well to better suit your raid. If you found this guide helpful or informative, remember to bookmark us at LearntoRaid.com, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Twitch TV and Twitter. As always, we hope this guide was helpful, and we'll see you at the next boss.
I wasn't feeling so good. I just didn't feel like playing anymore. So I went home, and I got all comfy and cozy and all scrunched up in front of my phonograph. Sat there and I closed my eyes and listened to all this